Hi, welcome to Waiver for Maya tutorial. My name is Muli. I am a character animator. I work in visual effects. In this video, I'm going to show how to use Waiver. I'm basically going to go through each tool in the shelf and I'm going to show how it works. And then towards the end of this video, I'm going to do a few examples of how to animate using those tools. So one way of using this video is basically you can watch the whole thing and then get an idea of how Waiver works, and then you can jump in and start animating. The other thing you can do is you can jump straight into Waiver, start playing around with the tools, and as you try to use a tool, if you right click on it, you're going to get a little drop down menu, and then there's going to be a help button. You click on that. It'll take you to a help page with a little explanation of how to use the tool, and also you'll have a link to this video in the time stamp where I talk about that specific tool. Waiver has a bit of a learning curve, so you need to get used to it a little bit before you get comfortable with it, but once you do, it should speed up your process of animating, especially things like tails, flags, tentacles, and basically anything that has this kind of wave-like motion in it. So with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so we're gonna start with these three buttons up here. Those are cycle highlights, and I'm gonna select all these joints over here. They have a little bit of an animation on them, and then the first one will cycle through translate channels. So every time I click it, it's going to go to the next one. If I shift click, it'll select all the translate channels, X, Y, and Z. And for something like a tentacle, which has a lot of controls on it, if I try to do it by hand, this could be quite time consuming. So this is what this does. It just allows me to do it with a click, and then let's say I'm going to do, so this one here in the middle is doing the same thing for rotation. So if I want to introduce a rotate X on all the controls, I can just use this tool, select all the keyframes, and move them all together. And there are more tools that helps you do other things to a lot of curves all at once. Now the third one here is doing the same thing, only for scale channels. So I'll cycle through the scale channels, and if I shift click, select all the scale channels, and if I right click on any of the buttons up here, I'm going to get a little bit of a drop down menu, and I can click help, and that will take me to the help page where it talks about that specific tool. Now there's going to be some more work to do on the explanation side of each tool, but this page you can read about what each button does, and there's going to be a link to this video where I talk about how to use the tool. One other thing, so again, if I right click and I click on the hotkey script, this will open up a little window with this Python script, which I can copy and put it on a hotkey and then use it as a hotkey, so I don't have to click up here. So for something like the cycle highlight, that's not as useful. I actually don't have it as a hotkey, but there are others like the push pull here or slide keys that I do have hotkeys and I use them quite frequently. Next, I'm going to show the add wave tool. So it's this button up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a keyframe right here, single keyframe, and I'm going to use this guy to select the rotation Y. So First of all, when you click this and you only have a single key selected, it will generate a wave for you. Right? It just puts in 3 more keys, so you can think of every 4 keys is one oscillation, one wave. And every time I'm going to click it from now on, whatever I have selected, it's going to duplicate it. So every click is going to be twice as long as what you have selected. So I can quickly create a curve that way. And there are more tools later to create variations on this and change it. Another thing you can do, I'm going to undo some of these. So I'll create a couple more. So if you don't want to have the whole thing duplicated, you just select the last 4 keys, and that way you just make one more wave. So that way, if you don't want to do, if you don't want to go too far, you can do that. Just select a chunk. If you by accident you select the wrong number of keys, that's okay too. All that's going to happen is you'll see this here, which is usually, you don't want that. Then you know that all you have to do is just go back, add one more key, and hit the add wave button, and it will do what you want to do. So the other things that you can do with it is you can create some variation in your graph, right? I can add a little bit of this and select again, and it will respect the changes that you made. So that way you can quickly create variations. These are crazy variations, this is a lot, but it's just to get the point across. So you can add a lot of variations like this, and hit the add wave, and it will duplicate what you have selected, or you just select the last 4 keys, and then it will only duplicate that last end like we did before. It's important to remember that this tool is operating on all these curves separately. So what I mean by that, let me just delete a chunk here, and let me grab, let's delete all these keys here. Let me grab, let's say, this one here, and I'm going to move it up. So this one is different than the other ones. And then I'm going to select all the rotate Y again. If I do this and I run the wave, it goes through every single channel up here, and it operates on that separately from the others. For example, if I have, I'm just going to create quickly a different wave. So let me delete all this. And then I'm going to select rotate Y. I'll bring this down here. So I'm going to make a single wave on all of them, and maybe change a couple of them. Maybe I'm going to take these and even, you know, spread them apart a little bit like so. And now when I select everything, I got different waves behave differently. Now when I run this, it will operate on each channel differently. Right, so those are shorter waves, so it's the same amount of wave, but they're kind of ending up short, where this one is longer waves, so they end up later. The move keys and offset keys are this pair here in orange, and the white ones here are the offset move keys. So these two are pretty basic. They just nudge whatever you have selected in your graph editor by 1 frame, either to the right or 1 frame to the left. those two have a little option up here that allows you to change that from one frame to whatever you want. So if you wanted to jump by 4 frames, you change it to that, and then every time you click it, it will nudge by 4 frames. Or if you want to do half keys, you can do that too. A fraction of a key, so you put that in here, and now when you use that, it's going to nudge the keys by half a frame. So that's pretty straightforward. The next two, the offset, what they would do, and I'm going to play this real quick here. So let me get this back here. So if you look at this animation I have in here, and I want to get this overlap kind of feel, these are very useful for that. So they will offset nudge all the keys I have selected, but it will offset by channel. So what I mean by that is, let me select all the rotation, and I'm going to select all the keys here, and I'm going to click it once. So what you can see, maybe it's a lot of keys to kind of see what's going on here, but every curve is 1 frame later, right? So I can show you what it looks like. You can see a little bit of that. We'll need a few more tools to make this look better, but it gives you the idea. It basically just creates an offset between each curve. And obviously the other one does the same. The offset is whatever is picked last is going to go the further than the rest, right? So if I go back here, so this up here is not going to move, and this rotation Y on joint 27 in this case is going to move by 27 frames, and this one will take it backwards. Same idea, only in reverse. So these two buttons up here, those are the offset value buttons. So what they do is, just like these two buttons offset keys in the time axis, these two offset the value of the keys. So if I click it once, let me do this and zoom in here so it's easier to see. If I'm going to click it once, you can see that it's starting to scale up the keys, but every curve going down from joint 1 going down to the last joint is scaled proportionally more. The first joint isn't scaled at all. It stays the same, but the rest of them are scaled more and more. So here it's a little subtle and you can't really see the difference, but if I'm going to keep scaling it up, and by the way, I don't know if I mentioned that before, but if you use the G key the way you use it in Maya, in the viewport it will repeat the command. So I'm going to click it a couple of times, and as you can see, now I get this more interesting curve in the tentacle, because the bottom joint is not rotating at all, and the further I go down the chain, the more rotation I get. So let me play back this, and you hopefully get the idea. These two up here are the squeeze keys and spread keys, and what they do is they add a frame between two keyframes that you have selected. Again, for each curve, it does that for each curve you have selected. So if I'm going to click it once, which is going to spread the keys. If I click this one, the squeeze keys, it will squeeze the keys down. And This button here, which I'm going to touch a little bit more later, is the pivot key, and it's relevant to some of the other tools as well. But for this specific tool, the squeeze and spread, what it does is it determines which key to use as a pivot. Either the last up here, sorry, the first key up here, or the last keyframe. So right now you can see it's set to the first keyframe, so it's going away from the first keyframe I have selected, or towards it. If I flip it to the last key, and now I'm going to spread, it's going to spread away from the last key, from this guy up here. And towards it if I use this squeeze keys. Now, part of what's important here is that in the fact that it's using each curve separately. That, for example, if I have an offset like so I basically offset the curves, it will still go one by one and add that frame. So you keep those shapes. Right, so you can see I got up here the overlap that gives me those nice arcs, and then the squeeze and spread will keep that, but just it'll slow everything down. So the more I click it, the slower it's going to get. And it does change the shapes a little bit, so you still need to watch what you see in the viewport when you use that. This button up here, this is the fade in and fade out. And what it does, I didn't want to call it ease in and ease out just so it's not confusing, because it's not exactly what it does, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to select a chunk of the animation here, and I'm going to make sure that the pivot is set to the first key. And when I click it once, it's going to ramp up towards the full swing, and the more I click on it, the more curved the ramp up is going to look. So if I play this, you can see it starts very slow, very subtle, and it slowly picks up speed. And then I can do the same thing to finish the animation. So if I go in here and maybe even select more, let's go up to here, and I need to make sure that the pivot is set to last key, and then I click once and I get this linear transition, and I can click it again and the transition would be more arced, like so. So you can see the tentacle starting at full swing and then slowly going into a halt. And this tool, you don't have to use it only for waves. It works for other things. It's just wasn't designed initially to work with regular animation, but I have used it for other things, and sometimes it works nicely and sometimes it's a little weird. So just keep that in the back of your mind, that you can try it on just regular animation, and if once you get a hang or get a feel for how this tool works, then you can start using it in other places and not just wavy movements like this. The flip curve button will flip the curve in relation to the pivot key. So right now we have the first keyframe set as the pivot. So when I'm going to hit flip, it'll flipped around this line, and if I change the pivot to last key, now it's going to use this keyframe. The last keyframe over here is the pivot, and flip around it. If I go and select this part here, now this is the last key, so now it's going to flip around that keyframe. These two are the push-pull buttons, and they do on a technical level something very similar to what, if you know Aaron Kurcell's Maya scripts, it technically does something similar, and for this specific and kind of utility for wave curves, it will basically increase or reduce the amplitude of the curve, and if I wanted to use it on multiple curves at once, something like this comes handy, because if it's too small, let's say, I can just grab everything and just make everything bigger or smaller. And you don't have to use this on a wave, a kind of wave motion. Even if you have a simple any animation you have, say I have here something like this, and this, so I can use the push-pull to this is pushing away. Right now it's pushing away from this keyframe here, so I need to switch here. And then I can use this to kind of edit ease-ins and ease-outs to make it faster or slower. The hold keys, that's the button right here. What this does is it will basically hold the keys depending on which pivot you use. So if I select these keys here, and my pivot is going to be the left, basically the first key, and I'm going to hit hold keys, it will take the values from these keys over here and just put it on the rest of the keys, so you get a flat line. So if you have something swimming in your animation, it's really good to kind of and you don't want to dig out why you're supposed to hold the pose but something's still going around. This is very useful. You just use that to kind of flatten out everything. You can do the opposite, where you select this part and then you flip the pivot to the right. So now we're using these keys as a pivot. Hit hold keys, and it'll flatten out the curves with these values, from taking the values from these keys. Now there's one more thing it does, is that if you don't have anything selected, it will just affect the keys that you have at the current frame that you're on. So if there are keyframes on the frame 49, and I use the pivot, the left pivot here, and I'm going to click hold keys, it will snap to these values from the previous one. If I flip the pivot here, click this, it will hold this, and it will do it if I don't have any keyframe in here, and I click on this, it will create a keyframe and just hold whatever pose I tell it, whether it's the previous or the next pose. The slide keys button right up here, it will slide the keys to wherever you are in the timeline. So if I select these keys here, I have my pivot set to the first key, and I hit slide keys, it will take the keys right to where my cursor is. If I flip the pivot, it will take the end of this animation and snap it to the current time that I'm at, like so. lineup keys, this is this one here. It's a little bit similar to the hold keys, but it's going to preserve your animation instead of flattening everything. So let me take one of the curves here, move up here, right? So let's say I want to copy this animation and put it here after all this stuff, but I want it to start rotating from where this keyframe is. So this is where the this tool comes in handy, the lineup keys. It'll just take this value of this keyframe and put it, it'll just slide everything to start from this value, as opposed to the, let me undo this for a second. Okay, put this up here. So as opposed to the hold keys that will flatten everything, and as just like the other tools, it'll be affected by the pivot. So if I switch to pivot, and let's say I have a keyframe here, somewhere here, and now my pivot is to the right, and I click on this, it will line it up with the last keyframe over here. Smooth keys up here, pretty straightforward. If you've done mocap before, you probably know some kind of a version of that. You just select a bunch of keys where you want to smooth them out, just click smooth, and the more you click it, the smoother it gets. Just watch out for the edges here. See, like the areas where you don't have selected, these can be a little tricky, but you can do is just grab this part, just smooth it a little bit more, and you should be good. Things like that, just hit smooth. There you go. Add noise is almost the opposite of smooth. It works a little differently, but the idea is that if you want to add a little bit of noise to your animation, basically you select the part where you want to add the noise, hit the noise button, and it will generate noise for you. And again, every click will generate more noise. So if you click it enough times, you're going to get this, the noise is going to be more apparent, and you can go back and forth, say maybe this part, smooth it out a bit, maybe it's too much, and maybe here add a little bit more, and that way you can kind of go back and forth. You can also go to the options tab, and you can increase or decrease the amount of noise. So I'm gonna make this really big. Let's do like a 0.8, and then for something like this, probably not that useful, but just to show it off, you click and it generates a lot more noise. Now where something like this could be more useful, let me show you. So let me get rid of this here. I'll get rid of all the Z animation, and I'm just going to quickly create some curves, spread them out a bit, spread them out from wait, let me do this, spread them out from the first key. Right, so if I want to create noise on this, and I'll only use the default value, I think it was 0.2. So if I hit add noise, it gets crazy, right, pretty quickly. That's a lot, and at least what I find usually when I use it. So for something like this, I would probably go in and use 0.05, something along those lines. And then now when I use the noise tool, it'll be more subtle. So it'll just give me a little bit of variation, but it won't go wild. In a future version, what I'm hoping to do is have some options down here so that you don't have to go all the way over here to change the values. You just click here and you'll have a few more options. These three buttons are basically allowing me to select quickly multiple tangents with a click. So if I go over here and I want to say, let's say I want to edit all the top keys up here, and I want to, I want a longer hang at the top. So if I click on this, it will select the right tangents on all of them, and then I can just all together, bring them up like this. So, for example, let's say I'm quickly going to create a bouncing ball over here, make it big, put it up here, and then key the Y, and I'm going to generate the up and down. Let me make a couple more. And that's a lot. Spread them up. I'm going to take this stuff and line up sorry. I'm going to line up this way, and then get rid of this. So it looks like it's not that high. A little higher. Let's do it over here so we don't have the tentacle showing up. So over here, let's just hide the tentacle for now. So I can grab the top keys up here, select either left or right, doesn't matter, and then I just pull them all together out like this. And then I can do the same thing down here. I'll select either the left or the right, do this, and I can pretty quickly get that kind of bouncing ball curve. Now you can do things like, it's not going to be relevant specifically for a bouncing ball, but you can rotate it instead of dragging it out, right? Something like this for a walk cycle, for the root, and then you can go back and just select the keys if you wanted to. Alright, so let's do a little demo. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all those joints and I'm going to put a rotation key on them, and then I want them to start with a rotation in Z. So I'm going to just select only the rotation Z keyframes, and I'm going to add waves. So click it once, it's going to give me one wave, and I can start with this one wave. Let me just spread it a little bit so it's not as fast. And I think at this point I can already start value offsetting the rotations so I can get more interesting shapes here, like so. And let's create a couple more. 1, 2. Can probably create a little bit of variation here just so it's a little bit more interesting. Let's flatten these out. Yeah, I think I can even push it more. So let's do a couple, something like this. All right, so let me create more waves. And that's a little bit too much, but that's fine. I'm gonna slide it over here just so I don't have to see the beginning, because the beginning might be a little bit of work to get it to look right. So have this. All right. So now I'm gonna offset the curves. I'm gonna use this guy here. Yeah, and that's already looking pretty cool. And that was with a couple clicks. Now, here I can still play with this. Let's see what happens if I push this a little bit more. It's getting a little weird. So I'm going to do this. And maybe shrink it down a bit. The offset. All right. So now when I look at it from here, it looks great, but if I'm looking at it from the side, it looks a bit flat. So what I can do is introduce another axis. And yeah, I think adding a bit of a X rotation could be cool. So let's switch to rotate X, grab these keys, create a wave. Now this time I'm probably gonna make this a much lower frequency, and let's push this up. Yeah, maybe a bit less frequency. Let's see this. Yeah, let's add a few more. It's going back and forth a bit too quickly for me, so let's do this. Let's introduce a bit of an offset. Yeah, here we go. We can maybe push this a bit. So further out. And there's some value offsets. Now, maybe one last thing we can try to do is put a start and an end to this. So we can grab this part here just to see what it looks like and add a bit of a fade in. Maybe have it start here. Let's see. Then what we can do is, let me take, rotate X, and this is one feature that I want to add eventually, is being able to take out waves, which you currently can't do. For now, I'm just going to grab these guys here and just offset this by hand. I'm going to use the slide keys to put this here. And now let's take all the rotations. We need to do the same thing with the Z rotations. So let's delete all of these guys. Delete all of these. And then over here, just do the same thing. Delete all these guys. Here. And then take this over here. I'm going to use the slide keys. Slide it a bit more. And then it's kind of important to make sure that you end on keys that are zeroed out, just because the fade in tool uses those keys to fade into. So if I didn't have those, let me delete this just to show that. And I try to fade in, it'll fade into this pose right here, which I don't want. So I want to make sure I have this. Let me see what it looks like in comparison. So yeah, probably further down here. And now I can grab this and I can actually, let me select all the rotations, take this, and fade in. And now let's play this from the start. There you go.